I worked as a dispatcher for a pretty small ambulance station near a fairly large city in the middle of the US. I don't know how specific I can be since this is a true story. Anyways, I'm gonna tell one of the craziest stories I've had on this job. We had a patient who we will call Susan. She was a dialysis patient, and one of the services we offered was to take very unwell or disabled patients to and from these dialysis appointments. She lived with her son, who we'll call David. He was in his late 40s, and his mother, Susan, she was in her late 70s or so. Every week, like clockwork, we would have a unit bring Susan to and from her dialysis treatments 3 times a week. Everyone knew her at the station because we had been doing this for quite some time with her. We were all familiar with her and her son, whether it was the crew seeing her in person or taking care of her, or speaking to her and her son on the phone frequently about the appointments, as I had done. So yeah, everyone knew her. Naturally, when the crew had bad news about her and her health, they would report back to keep everyone in the loop on how she was. At one point, she was not feeling well at all, but she wanted to go into her dialysis appointment anyway, so naturally we obliged and we took her in. At this appointment, while receiving dialysis treatment, she lost consciousness and was promptly taken care of by her crew at the hospital. When it was time again for her dialysis appointment, we gave the hospital a call to see if she had been released and was able to go out to the appointment. The hospital staff informed us that she would likely be released the following day and would be receiving that dialysis treatment in the hospital. Then, the next treatment time rolled around and we called the hospital and we were told that she had been released from the care the other day. This was great news, but a little strange due to the fact that we were always her first call to transport her from hospital or appointment, and we hadn't transported her anywhere. We quickly moved on, however, and called David, her son, to see if she was going to be requiring us for her treatment that day. He informed us that she wasn't feeling well and that she wasn't up for it, but that he was considering taking her back to the hospital. We tell him that if he needs us, just to give us a call until further notice, and we'll cancel her trip for that day. We never get a call. The next appointment rolls around and we call David again to ask how she will be going. He says she's sick and she's back in the hospital. Weird again since we hadn't taken her, but doesn't seem off considering her health had been deteriorating. Next appointment comes around. The same thing happens. We call David, his mom's in the hospital, and we move on. Now this is where things took a bit of a turn. When the next appointment came up, we started trying to call Dave to ask about his mother's status, but he never answered or returned our calls. So being that we had a contract with Susan, and we had to take these appointments unless told otherwise, we sent a crew to go collect her for treatment. When the crew arrived at the scene, they knocked on the door to no response. They knocked again and were greeted by David smoking a cigarette. David seeming surprised, the crew said that they were there to pick up Susan for her appointment. David responded stating that he had forgotten to call Susan, but she was still at the hospital and was really not doing well. The crew gave their best wishes to David and shut the door, but the crew felt like something was off. They immediately radioed the dispatch that something was wrong and they requested that we call the hospital David said she was at to see if she was still there. The hospital had no record of her being there since we last knew. So, we had the crew leave the scene and we called for a welfare check on Susan at her son's home. We heard nothing for the rest of the day from the police, David, Susan, or anyone else involved. The next morning, I came into work and the very first call I took began with, "Hello, this is Sheriff Blank with Blank. I'm calling to report back on a welfare check you asked us to perform yesterday." I was kinda nervous as he sounded concerned and I didn't really expect them to call us back with any news. He proceeded to let me know that upon arrival at the home they spoke with David, who was adamant that his mother didn't feel well, but that she was home from the hospital. The police asked just to check up on Susan to make sure she was alright, and eventually, David obliged, letting the police in. Once entering the room, they were met with a grim scene, though I imagine they smelled it first. They continued to explain that what the officers observed was the dead body of Susan propped up on the couch, wrapped up in blankets, as if it was watching TV, but she had been dead for a while. They approximated about 2 weeks. When speaking to David, they found out that he had been changing her clothes regularly and watching TV with her. Obviously, he was suffering from some sort of mental issue and grief, but the thing was, he had never taken good care of her until she was dead. No news coverage or no updates from the police further than that. Nothing. Stuff like this that happens in your hometown, and you'll never know. Crazy, right? A buddy of mine once had to lift a husband and wife who shared a bottle of liquor every night. They were both obese, so they would drink till the wife would fall down and couldn't get back up. The fire department finally quit showing up to the lift assist calls, so it usually was just a couple of us from EMS and the occasional deputy who would show up to peel her off the floor. They always refused to go to the hospital, refused any other assistance, and refused to go to a nursing home or assisted living home. Also, they pretty much burned their bridges with everyone around them, including their own family, until the day comes where we get the welfare check and we gotta go to that house. A deputy on the scene was calling for SCBAs and hazmat. The husband was found on a recliner and the wife was found on the floor. It was guessed that the husband died first, and the wife fell trying to get to her husband. She had soiled herself on the floor while laying there for days and couldn't get to the phone. The floor was a slip and slide with shit and other fluids. It was nearly impossible trying to maneuver the bodies into the bags without face planting. Their faces weren't even recognizable anymore. It was estimated that the husband had been dead for 7 days, and the wife died a few days later. We ended up having to roll the husband off the recliner straight into the bag because his skin was degloving, and anything we tried to grab would just rip off. Double bagged and transported together. That was the end of that. So this story starts when we get a wellness check on a person who hasn't been seen for 2 days. Guy lives on the 15th floor of the projects, and it's in the middle of August. I was working with someone who's relatively new that day, only had a few weeks just out of the academy. Good guy, eager to learn, and not lazy, thankfully. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, New York City in August is basically Vietnam. High 80s to low 90s, with a humidity of 70% all of the time. Even when it rains, it's that warm rain that feels good, like God's pissing on you. You walk outside and it feels like you're walking into a wall of weather. You start sweating the instant you step out of AC. We also happen to be right on the tail end of a heat wave at this time. So, my partner, myself, and 2 cops are going up in the elevator. We're EMT, by the way. Anyways, when we pass floor 10, we start to smell it. That sickeningly sweet smell of decomposing flesh. There's nothing that more smells like death than shit and piss mixed with rotting meat. We get to the 15th floor and there's these huge flies just lazily buzzing around, and a steady stream of bugs moving in and out of the door down the hall. There's no answer when we knock, so we start to take care of the door. The first firefighter who goes through the door immediately drops to his knees and vomits from the stench. I feel comfortable saying it was slightly less hot than your average sauna inside. The air was thick with flies and gnats and all manner of insects. The rest of the firefighters nope the fuck out of there, so it's just me, my partner, and the 2 cops again. Both officers are staying outside the apartment and fighting the urge to gag from the fresh hell that was just unleashed on the hallway. My partner and I go in and start looking for the guy because he's not visible from the doorway. The kitchen is clear, the living room is clear, the bathroom is clear. We turn the corner and there it is. There's a vaguely human-shaped mass of flesh in the doorway to the bedroom. In life, the guy was probably around 275 to 300 pounds. In death, who knows? I just remember that he no longer resembled anything remotely human. The skin was black where it made contact to the floor. It also appeared to fuse with the carpet. The other end was just molted green and purple. His fingers and most of his feet were gone. The eye sockets were just pulsating globs of maggots. The midsection looked oddly deflated, as if someone filled it up with air then popped it. There were roaches fucking everywhere. And then we heard this sound, this high-pitched, annoyed, squealing sound. My partner says, "What's that?" And I said, "Rats or mice probably." You can see that they already started on his hands and feet. Should we check for a pulse? My partner asks. I just looked at him. Sure, right after we check outside to ensure that Jesus has returned to Earth. We head outside to weigh thinner air, and the cops ask if he's dead and if there's any signs of foul play. Guy's been dead for at least 2 weeks. Your guess is as good as mine, is all we could say. And with that, we happily marked it a DOA and left the body in the custody of New York's finest. And after that, we both took exceedingly long showers. My brother is a paramedic, and in the city he works in, it requires an officer to go with them when they arrive on the scene due to some of the violence. They were called by police to come help a naked, distressed male covered in blood and was wandering around the street yelling at cars and carrying a knife. When they arrived, they were met with an officer who said that the guy was dragging 2 naked children down the road before he tried to throw them into traffic, but the kids were not hurt, and the man ran down the road to go yell at more cars. The officer called for more backup to confront the man, and my brother called the fire chief to get more people to help handle the kids, and to go stand by if any of the officers got injured by the man. In about 10 minutes, there were 5 officers, my brother, his partner, the fire chief, and 2 more paramedics, so 10 men in total. The police coaxed the man to get near the ambulance so that they can assist if he was injured and required immediate attention. The man was put on a gurney and taken to my brother's ambulance to be assisted. In the ambulance, my brother, the initial officer, and my brother's partner all sat in the back to check out the man. In the instant my brother closed the door, the man decided to go crazy. He punched my brother in the nose and lunged for the officer's gun. My brother and his partner hit the panic button on their radios, and that gave off an alert to any units in the area that they need to respond. The officer gets a handcuff around the guy's hand, but can't attach it to anything because the guy was using superhuman strength, which turns out was due to him being methed out of his mind. The back doors to the ambulance opens, and there were 4 other police officers, the fire chief, and the 2 other paramedics, and all 7 guys dive on the methed out guy in an attempt to restrain him. The fire chief got hit with the wild handcuff in the teeth, and all 10 of them could barely keep the guy down. My brother said that the 2 officers decided just to tase the man, and they finally got him restrained and into handcuffs. He was giving a sedative, and the 2 officers had to ride in the back of the ambulance with their tasers out to make sure he didn't try to do anything else. Once they dropped off the man to the hospital, all the officers, paramedics, and anyone who was in contact with the man was quarantined in a ward for several hours. Apparently the guy was in contact with dangerous chemicals from the making of meth in his apartment, and anyone in contact with him could be carrying the same chemicals around in their clothes. Remember how he was naked when they found him? Him, his kids, and his wife were all naked because he was making meth in his apartment. His wife complained that she didn't want him making meth anymore, so he beat the shit out of her, thus getting covered in her blood. He was so angry that he decided he was going to kill his kids too and dragged them outside, then was confronted by the officer. Now, I'm not that familiar with the laws around creating meth or hard drugs, but apparently when charged with creating meth, you get charges against you for every person living in that building as you're putting them in danger. He lived in an apartment building with over 100 people in it, so 100 people were in danger of him making that meth. So, he was charged for putting all of them in danger. He was then charged with assault of the officers, aggravated assault, resisting arrest, 3 counts of attempted murder, and cooking meth with a huge sentence. Come to think of it, he's probably gonna die in prison. I've been an EMT/paramedic since 2011. I've seen some vile things. I've heard some screams that have bothered me for years. I've talked to some psych patients that I've longed for nothing more than death. I've smelled burning flesh while they screamed until I had to do RSI. I've seen children that were sodomized and beaten to death. I've seen people mangled and filled in unnatural holes. I held a mother over the body of her 17-year-old son that had shot himself after finding out that she was having an affair with his best friend, explaining to her that if a team of surgeons were sitting there when he did it, he would have survived. Needless to say, we've all had our own Vietnam. It's hard to find the worst, It's such a broad question. Is the worst that you're seeking the most gore? Is it the one that made me have to go home and hold my kids praying that I would get another day, week, or year? Is it the worst point in your career where you felt like a complete failure in the eyes of your team? The worst is subjective. To me, I can't label the worst scene. I know ones that have put me in therapy, and the ones that made me contemplate killing myself. The first one that put me in therapy, we were contacted for a child on the highway, no further information than that. At the time, I had been an EMT for about 2 years and just became an advanced EMT. I was the highest level of care. We arrived on the scene with my partner pulling up to see a little girl about 2 to 4 years old laying on the ground with an obvious fracture with blood pouring from her brow. Directly behind her is an SUV with a man hanging halfway outside the window with a firefighter doing CPR. I told my partner to get the girl and I'll assist with the rest of the scene. He placed the girl in a C-collar and took her to the truck. When I went to assist the man, when I got to the patient, he had no pulse and had fixed and dilated pupils. I did a rapid head-to-toe assessment. As I put my hands on his head, it felt like jello from a large saline breast implant. I told the firefighter to manually halt and called the time. The police had told me that the car was clear, so I went back to the ambulance to assist my partner, who had insisted on the help of an off-duty nurse nearby. I remember that little girl screaming for her dad, saying, "I want my daddy, where's my daddy?" Myself and the man were the same age. That little girl was the same age as mine. The screams she made were only interrupted by the second beating on our ambulance as they found the little boy that had been thrown from the vehicle. The little boy was bloody and posturing with his teeth clenched. We had the road shut down and flew the kids to a trauma center. The SUV had rolled an estimated 6 times. We waited as I watched that man's husband break down on the side of the road screaming and crying and begging. I broke down. The ME came out and gathered him with the husband, never leaving his side. Our ambulance acting as a barrier between him and the traffic, like church doors closing on a Sunday morning before Mass, giving him and myself some sort of sanctuary to cry on the side of the road and myself in the driver's seat. Even in our emptiness, humans seek community. The lesson that I would pass along is that even in your occupation, the genuine kindness and solidarity that you do with the public is the most important thing about this profession. To preface, if you're having a good day, do not read this post. My dad was the only licensed paramedic in our Tri-County area for many years. His area covered 2 interstates and numerous major highways in Ohio. He was undoubtedly the toughest person I've ever known, just based on the stories I've heard him recounting, most of the time when he thought I didn't know that I could hear him. That, along with some of the other things that I heard had happened to him, and secondhand stories from other first responders who had worked with him. One of them, his own personal accident. Back in '88, he was on his Honda Goldwing. A drunk driver in the opposite lane went to pass their car, hitting him head-on about 65 miles per hour. Him being a bodybuilder, he involuntarily tensed enough to survive the accident, and when the first responders showed up, he was trying and failing to stand his bike up to ride off, and they had to gently inform him that he's not going to be able to do that because his left leg below his knee was still stuck in the drunk driver's grill about 20 feet away. He did get the leg reattached, however, about 1.25 inches shorter and with a slight limp, but still going strong. On to his paramedic stories. He's been the first man on scene for numerous accidents with high school kids, one of which happened about 8 miles from our home, which is important. 2 teenage girls lost control and hit a power line, which collapsed on top of them, pinning them in their car. Apparently, there were serious injuries. They were conscious and coherent, but the power line was live, and the power company couldn't cut off power, so the first responders were forbidden from attempting to help. My dad was having none of this, and drove home to get his backhoe to remove the pole himself. Both girls died before he could successfully free them, more or less, in front of his eyes while he tried to reassure them. Next, we were eating lunch together and he got a call to respond to a vehicle/train accident. We got there, me still with my small soda in hand, and the cop on scene looks at me, then my dad, and says he might want someone to come pick me up because it was going to take a while. The driver of the truck got hit by the train and had coughed his lungs out of his mouth and was going to need a few bags. That image stuck with me for a good while. Next, a motorcycle accident on the interstate. A group of 4 bikers in loose formation had gone to pass an 18-wheeler, but they stayed too wide the whole way. My dad taught me long before this that was a cardinal no-no. You stay as far away from the big rigs as possible because the winds near them get strong and unpredictable. Well, these folks failed to heed that warning, and one of the front inside riders got drawn in towards the truck, overcompensated on the other way, and ran into his friend. He was then thrown off his bike and, while falling, got caught, for lack of a better word, on either a foot peg or a brake lever, and I quote, unzipped him from his ankle to his armpit like a Halloween costume. Eventually, the straw broke the camel's back. Why he finally called it quits being a paramedic was an 18-year-old boy that drowned in the family pond. Dad was the first one there, pulled the boy out, and immediately started to try to get him back to life. He stayed unresponsive during the ambulance ride, passing away while my dad kept working on him and trying to revive him until the ER room basically pulled him off. When I got older, he admitted that he kinda lost it on that call because all he could see was me lying on the floor drowning that night. I have many more, but I think that's enough negativity for today. Thank you.